Hi there. This video is the 14th of a series dedicated to my book Blockchain plus Antitrust, the Decentralization Formula. You can access all the chapters following the link in the description. Today, I would like to discuss several concrete proposals for regulating blockchain. First, let me emphasize that I do not assume that everything should be regulated because why not? Quite the contrary. I see the absence of regulation as the default. But two things here, especially for the computer scientists watching this video. First, I explained in previous videos that blockchain needs regulation for two main reasons. One, to sanction illegal behaviors, and two, to benefit blockchain participants. And second, guess what? Regulation is coming whether you like it or not. So let's dive into the subject and let's try to make it as good as possible. First, I believe that comfort zones are an essential mechanism to be used and developed in the space. But what are they? The quick answer to this question is the following. Comfort zones are innovation hubs, regulatory sandboxes, and legal safe harbors. There are ways for regulators and policymakers to gather information about a specific technology and test new information while ensuring legal comfort. Okay, let me explain how this works. Innovation hubs are loose cooperation between firms and regulators that allow these firms to raise questions and seek clarifications and non-binding guidance. Regulatory sandboxes are testing grounds for businesses supervised by regulatory bodies. In a nutshell, firms apply to enter the sandbox, and if they get in, they agree to send regular information to regulators while in exchange getting what is typically called a no enforcement action letter, meaning a letter from the regulator saying it won't enforce the law against specific aspects of that firm's activities. And third, we have safe harbors. There are legal provisions exempting liability on the fulfillment of certain conditions. Section 230 of the Communication Act in the United States is a good example. These safe harbors clarify when regulators won't enforce the law, or put differently, when a practice is legal or not. Now, regulators tend to like these mechanisms because they enable them to gather information about a technology they do not understand too well or that is moving too fast. But the question is, why should companies join these comfort zones? In fact, when I discuss with regulators, I'm often surprised to learn that they struggle to get companies to apply. This is why I believe we have to work on incentives. As I mentioned already, the incentive can be legal. In the short term, it protects companies from enforcement. And in the long run, it helps design better regulation. That is, at least, if the firms in it do not capture the sandbox. But we can also imagine economic incentives. In all likelihood, tax breaks will be quite effective. Once companies are in, they send information and experiment together with regulators. Here, there is a balance between changing blockchain code and governance to enable legal enforcement, while preserving the willingness to use these new types of blockchains. If you ask me, this is art as much as science. There are different solutions to be tested, whether we want to rely on enums, modifiers, chameleon hashes, etc. As I said in a previous video, the end goal is to enable enforcement, but only after an illegal practice has been implemented. Let us not use these comfort zones with the idea in mind that we can prevent all illegal practices. If you have seen the movie Minority Report, you know it does not end well. Now, I do not know which one of these solutions is best, and that's precisely why we should test them using these sandboxes. But please note that we could also use agent-based modeling to simulate their effect or conduct lab experiments. Before I move on, I want to emphasize the risk of regulatory capture. Market players within the ecosystem will be tempted to promote regulation that benefits them. Market players outside the ecosystem will be tempted to capture regulation to hamper blockchain growth and, why not, prohibit blockchain. And last, public institutions could also be tempted to capture regulation for themselves. Look at it this way. Blockchain applications compete with specific public services. It competes with the power to print money. Regulation could protect public power, sometimes for good reasons, some other times for less good reasons. So let us make sure to monitor regulatory capture. Okay, on to my second proposal, Antitrust agencies, and more generally all enforcers, shall adopt a clear and strategic enforcement strategy. Here is what I mean by that, in 3 points. 1. Agencies shall conduct investigations and prosecute the practices hurting blockchain participants. Some of the market players from the centralized world will compete fairly, but others will try to implement illegal behaviors to eliminate blockchain applications. Let us go after these practices. For example, when centralized market players unfairly prohibit blockchain advertisement, or when banks are refusing to open bank accounts to blockchain developers. There is currently such a case being trialed in Brazil. 2. Agencies should go after illegal practices that re-centralizes blockchain because they destroy the point of the ecosystem. This is especially true at the key layers, such as I expose in the 4th videos of this series. For example, cartels between core developers shall be prosecuted without a shaking hand. But when they go after these practices implemented within blockchain ecosystems or using blockchain to impact the real space, agencies should be careful not to endanger blockchain survival. As I explored in the 3rd video of this series, maintaining blockchain's chances of survival requires adopting a Darwinian perspective and preserving what differentiates blockchain from other digital infrastructures. For example, should regulators and enforcers impose a blockchain to name one person in charge and give that person power to stop or revert transactions, they would force centralization of that basic key layer. If that is done, I fail to see why anyone would use such a blockchain instead of a fully centralized service. Alternatively, the remedy could be refused by blockchain users, in which case it won't be implemented and efficient at all. 3. Agencies shall avoid prosecuting the central characteristics of blockchain, such as I have explained in the 2nd video of this series. For example, public permissionless blockchains distribute information throughout the marketplace, including the number of transactions implemented by specific users, the fees being paid, etc. This transparency could lead to antitrust concerns, but it also makes markets more fluid and mitigate information asymmetry. And now, my 3rd and final proposal. This one is probably not for today, but for the years ahead of us, if ever. I believe that blockchain should be used to decentralize enforcement, and you know what? The design of regulation. This would resolve a key tension between the decentralization that blockchain participants aim for and the centralization of public institutions. So here's how to proceed toward what I call a Futarchic antitrust. First, I need to explain what predictions markets are. In simple words, they form a mechanism to identify sincere beliefs by forcing participants to put their money where their mouth is. They ask what people think will happen instead of asking people what their preference is. In practice, there are bets. One attributes the probability that a future event will materialize between 0 and 1 and creates a bet in which the entry price equals the perceived probability. After the event has or has not materialized, only those who bet on the correct outcome receive a payoff, while the other ones lose their bet. Let me take an example. If person X's likelihood to be elected president of the United States is 70%, you will have to spend $0.7, euros, or tokens to bet on person X's election. Conversely, you will have to put 0.3 to bet on person X's non-election. Once the result is known, those who bet on the correct outcome receive their money back, plus the loser's money. Okay, now I can explain what Futarchic is. Futarchic uses these bets to determine a governance strategy in the private and public sectors. So, in my example, instead of creating a prediction market disconnected from the election, you would create 2 prediction markets. One for person X election, the other for person Y election. The one candidate with the most bet in favor will be elected on that basis. And in fact, you could condition the bets. Instead of asking if a candidate will be elected, you could ask whether, if elected, that candidate could reach a specific objective over 2 years, let's say to reduce carbon emission. In the private sector, you could create a prediction market to ask whether the shares of a company would rise over 10% after 1 year if a specific new product is put on the market. The original idea of prediction markets is to open them to everyone. People with bad predictions lose money and stop betting, so prediction markets accuracy improves over time. But you can also restrict access to prediction market. You can open a prediction market only to your employees. Now, how do blockchains fit within this picture? Well, they can improve prediction markets in different ways. First, blockchain enables to use tokens instead of using fiat currencies. This enables automatic transactions by way of smart contract, and that's reason number 2. Smart contracts can automate payments once the result is known, and because they are immutable, it creates trust in the prediction market's integrity. And third, blockchain can facilitate a reputation system. The idea is to let users challenge recorded results. If they are right and the result was not properly recorded, they can get an automatic payoff using reputation tokens. If they are wrong, they can lose tokens. Okay, now let us apply all that to antitrust enforcers. Most antitrust laws are based upon predictions. What would happen if we agreed on this merger? What would happen without the practice being implemented? In a sense, agencies are required to imagine a different future, going back in time before the practice has been implemented, asking what would have been the state of competition without the practice in question. Futarchic could therefore prove helpful. Let me make my point with a concrete example. Agencies could create 2 prediction markets to discover whether, 1 year after the merger, the average price of a product at stake has greater chance of increasing if the merger is authorized or not. The first prediction market assumes that the merger is accepted, and the second that the merger is prohibited. After the betting period has expired, it presents the agency with 2 probabilities. Let us say 80% that prices will increase if the merger is accepted, and only 2% that they will increase if the merger is prohibited. Well, the agency could bind itself to this result and prohibit the merger. It could also just take this result into consideration as one element of its analysis. And let me say once again that the agency could open this prediction market to the entire market or just to its employees. The same logic could be applied for remedies and commitments to predict if they will be efficient, and it could certainly work for competition policies. Now, there are 3 main challenges with Futarchic antitrust. First, prediction markets might be manipulated, but remember that such a strategy is very costly, as indeed it requires to put money on the wrong bets. This means that agencies should inquire whether the stakes are sufficiently high for a company to bet on the wrong outcome. Second, some non-price related outcomes are hard to measure, such as whether work conditions have improved, the quality of products, etc. And 3, predictions markets are seen as gambling activities in numerous jurisdictions, and they are therefore heavily regulated. This led several Nobel laureates and economists to call for new legal rules to facilitate prediction markets in an article that they published in 2008. That is all for today. Thank you very much for listening. Take care of yourself, and if you can, someone else too. Cheers.